Hi everybody, and welcome to Question and Answers with myself, Michelle Brooks, and the lovely Dr. Victoria Baxter. So today we've had some questions from our respective groups, and we're going to help to cover these questions from people who've over the month have asked us some very important questions that we're going to endeavour to answer to the best of our ability. So hi Victoria, how are you doing?
Hello, good morning. Yeah, I'm well, thank you. You?
Good. Yeah, really well, thank you. So do you want to kick off with your questions that you've got from your group?
Okay, thanks, Michelle. Yeah, I've had two questions, and actually both relate to endometriosis specifically,
Fabulous.
which I know is a specialist area of yours.
Yeah.
So the first question was one that I was actually asked right at the last minute last time, so we didn't get a chance to ask it, so we've carried it over. And it's just whether you'd have any recommendations of kind of nutritional approaches to managing the pain associated with endometriosis.
Yeah, I mean, it's a funny one because pain obviously is the main concern with any endometriosis sufferer, but there's no one thing that you can eat or not eat to get rid of that pain. So like obviously we talked on previous platforms, and there's never like a simple answer to this. So the way I work with women to help with that pain is through a three-pronged approach. And that is by the nutrition, the exercise, and reducing stress. So your nutrition could be perfect and on point, but if you're loading your body with too much exercise, too much heavy exercise, too much intensity exercise at a time of the month where it's not going to be that great for you, and raising cortisol is the main thing that we kind of like look into, try and reduce as much as possible around, again, that time of the month. And you've got a lot of stress going on. The stress, again, is going to raise the cortisol. You know, we always think about stress in the kind of mindful stress, that like it's in the brain, but the stress can also be in the body.
Well, so yeah, your brain's going to trigger off that stress response in the body, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I would say, like, yes, nutrition is very important, but you've also got to think of the other two elements as well, because if, again, your nutrition is on point, then these other two are completely out of sync, that you've got a lot of stress going on mentally, and you're putting a lot of stress on your body with the exercise that you're doing, then no matter how good your nutrition is, then, you know, it's not going to do you any good with the pain aspect if those two are not in sync as well. But with what I kind of teach about endometriosis eating, and this is again is why the pain would reduce, is an anti-inflammatory way of eating, kind of following an anti-inflammatory plan or a Mediterranean plan, which would give you probably the same results. So it's lowering things like starchy carbohydrates that are, you know, will give you insulin spikes, taking out everything that's processed, that again for endometriosis sufferers, the chemicals and the preservatives that are in stuff like that are really not going to do you any favors, because again, we're trying to get away from inflammation, and if that's something will cause you inflammation, then the two mixed with the pain around your period time, or the pain in general that endometriosis sufferers have, if you've got inflammation rising in the body, then it's going to not mix well with your endometriosis.
Could you give us a couple of examples of what you mean by processed? Because I know there's different levels of processed, isn't there? So obviously even things like cheese and yogurt are processed, but what do you mean when you say processed food?
Yeah, I mean anything that you've got to ping it, anything that anything that goes in a microwave and is like prepackaged as a meal, I would say absolutely not. Things that, you know, you can take this to an extreme. I mean, we would say like a tin tomato is processed, but then you've got to work out what is like right for you. So cheese for me, with endometriosis as well, a lot of sufferers are intolerant to dairy, so they wouldn't be eating it anyway. But I would say that a lot of endometriosis sufferers basically can eat things like goat and ewe cheese. Whether they're as processed as some, I don't really know, to be honest with you. But I would say you have to know where the limit is for you. But definitely I would say nothing that's ping it, anything that's from a packet, you know, like packet soups and stuff like that. Again, if it's in a powder and you've got to mix it with something to make it a meal, not great.
And is this because of, like you say, the chemicals that might be in that, and they're going to maybe cause an inflammatory response in your body?
Absolutely, yeah. And again, things that are processed are very high in either sugar or salt. to preserve them. And again, these are two things. Refined sugar is another thing that massively increases inflammation. So I would say to people with endometriosis, stay away from processed refined sugar, processed foods, in the fact that you've got to ping it or add something to it to make it a meal. Stay away from things that are too salty. Again, you don't have to cut salt out of your diet because you do need it, but don't add salt to your food, and try to stay away from things that are high in potassium or salt. Reduce alcohol as much as possible. I always say, because I like a glass of wine like the best of them, but I never drink in the lead up to my period, because that's when my inflammation needs to be as low as possible, and alcohol does cause inflammation. So try and get that to a point where you drink after your period.
And I was just thinking, as you're describing all those things, am I right in thinking the main message being that to pay close attention to this in that run up to your period and during your period?
Yes.
And you might find that for your personal body in the rest of the month, you can maybe reach more for those things.
Yeah.
And it have
exactly.
less of an effect, but be a bit more careful around that time. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. It's an individual thing.
Yeah.
I would find that in probably about 80% of the women I work with that have endometriosis, if they cut out and be very strict with everything that's inflammatory in that kind of week leading up to and during the period, then the week afterwards, if you fancied like a bag of crisps or a pizza or a glass
going
of
out
wine,
for tea or something, and you're probably going to get served.
That would be the time that would probably pass a lot better than in that time leading up to, and would, again, like as we're talking about pain, would make it so that the pain wouldn't be as intense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And is there anything you could suggest nutrition wise to add into your diet that would, at any point in the month, but just stuff that to add in that you would say is recommended?
Yeah, anything that's like quite good with fiber, anything that's good as an antioxidant, because again, we're trying to get rid of toxins from the body. So I always recommend greens. Greens is my thing. Add greens to it. If you're eating anything, add greens to it. And I always find that for women with endometriosis, greens is a massive key. So definitely greens. What else?
I've heard about turmeric. Is that
turmeric? Yeah, turmeric's a really great anti-inflammatory again. Whether you eat it, as add it to your food, or take a capsule, yeah, turmeric can be amazing. Definitely water. Water is your friend. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I've always got it here. I've always got a dry throat, so I never stop talking.
I've got some apple cider vinegar in this. Is that an anti-inflammatory thing or a gut health thing? Or
gut health, more kind of the same thing, but not. But yeah, apple cider vinegar for the gut. Again, your gut's good, your brain's good. It's a two-way thing. And again, that can help with pain when your gut is good for endometriosis sufferers. So there's so many different branches you can go off in this. But I would say that if you stick to an anti-inflammatory plan, and again, get the exercise and the stress levels right, then the pain would definitely be a lot less, for sure.
Thank you so much. That's really, really great. Good starting point for anyone wondering about that. So my second question, also endo related, is so we know that endometriosis is related to the hormones to do with a woman's monthly cycle. So after menopause, when that cycle doesn't exist anymore and the hormones have gone through the period of adjustment and they are now as they're going to be, would you expect endometriosis to disappear as such? Can it?
Theoretically, yes, it should, because basically endometriosis is estrogen dominant. So obviously when you go through menopause, the estrogen drops, which you're going to get other symptoms. I'm not saying it's going to be a breeze, but generally for women with endometriosis, it can feel a little bit easier when they start to go through menopausal years. But it would depend on where your endometriosis has actually attached itself to. So if there's been complications with, like, it's stuck to the bowel, for instance, the urinary tract, in some cases, obviously in very severe cases, it can stick to the lungs. So it depends on where the endometriosis is actually stuck to and how severe it is, as to if it would make a difference after menopause. Because I have had women that have had very severe endometriosis and they've had operations, obviously, on the bowel, on the lungs, and it's obviously caused other problems. So whilst, yes, theoretically, the menopause should help women with endometriosis, it would depend on the severity of the endometriosis that they had.
Okay, right. Lovely, thank you.
No problem. So questions for you? So my group that I have on Facebook, the Beat the Bloaters,
of which I am one of them.
Yeah, I know, and it's lovely to have you with us. I just would like you to kind of describe to the ladies in there what it is you do for a living, so that in turn, hopefully, they will maybe have questions for you, and that in turn you can help them within the group as well.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks. So I'm a clinical psychologist, which means that, oh gosh, it's a really hard thing to put succinctly because we have so many strings to our bow as to what we do. But the essence of being a clinical psychologist, it means that we work with people who might come to us because some part of their life is feeling not quite right, you know, whether it's what you might call problematic, or whether it's that there's a lot of distress around for some reason. But when something's off kilter and someone feels like they want a bit of help to understand what's going on, a psychologist will start by helping use psychological theory to really get a good understanding of somebody's experience. So usually it involves sitting down with someone, working collaboratively with them to maybe explore what's going on in the here and now. Some people like to have a think back over their whole life, and again we bring that psychological lens, usually thinking about things like attachment theory and a bit of I'm thinking here specifically as well within my relationship with food work, which I'll mention in a moment, but a bit of maybe like the neuroscience behind how the brain and body interacts and things, to get a good understanding of what's going on now, and maybe some of the factors that might have contributed to the development of this problem over someone's life. So that's a clinical psychologist in general, and I work in the NHS in a pain management service actually. So I do support some people with endometriosis, interestingly, where we don't have any nutritional input in that pain management service, and that's something we're working on now. But I work in pain 3 days a week and have an extensive history in mental health services and other physical health services as well. But now in this capacity, in the capacity that we met, I work with people specifically on their relationships with food. So I look at this through that, let's say, psychological lens of relationships. So that's where I particularly draw upon attachment theory to think about with someone, how they relate to food, how that relationship has evolved over your life, all the different influences that might have been in that. And say there's a bit of brain science goes on with it, because we know that there's such a strong influence biologically into things like cravings and such. So we work up this understanding with someone for them personally, and then that will help indicate what kind of therapy might be useful if someone was wanting to make changes. And you know, again, as a psychologist, we're trained in a handful of different like nice recommended therapies, approaches to therapy, and then there's particular approaches that we might draw upon for different, you know, depending on what that understanding has shown to us. So there's a few approaches that I use most often in this line of work. I tend to find compassion focused therapy is very helpful, and something called acceptance and commitment therapy. And these are particularly ACT, we shorten that to. Particularly ACT has a growing evidence base for use in weight management services. But equally, CFT, compassion focused therapy, is growing in its evidence base too. But these two seem to be the approaches that lend themselves best to these issues. So where people are wanting to not only understand what's going on, but then make active change, these therapies help you learn some new skills and tools to change how you respond to yourself and to food and in your health in general.
And we've obviously talked a lot about you talking about this diet culture, that people have got certain things ingrained in the brain about what food is good and what is bad.
Yes, so diet culture, I think it's massive, especially probably personally for people around about my age, because we've maybe grown up in a society of like Weight Watchers, Slimming World, you know what I mean, it's been all around us. I am noticing some shift in that now, actually, as I'm working with some younger people for which they seem to be away from that. The anti-diet message seems to be getting out there, which is great.
Fantastic.
But a lot of particularly women, but my work isn't exclusive to women, but particularly women have maybe grown up in this society and culture like I have, exposed to so much diet thinking, diet mentality, and there's a huge load of that often comes up when we do we call it a formulation with someone, that piece of work to understand things. So yeah, a lot of the therapies might be about challenging some of that, rewiring how we think, and then actually also a bit similar to you were saying about managing stress, that comes into it a lot, because we know that on a biological basis, when there's a lot of cortisol around in the brain and the body, then we're probably on a back foot to make mindful choices. So I often look at stress management as a whole and health awareness as a whole to come together and to have a positive influence.
That's amazing. And I think, like, for the group that obviously we're talking to here, my group, I think that is like something that you can massively help the ladies with, because they obviously get this notion in their head that, oh, I've had a bad day and I'm going to have this, or you know, just that psychology behind like what you're saying, or about food, and I think you can like have a massive input into what we're doing in the group, for sure.
That'd be nice. Like I came at this, I suppose, from my own like selfish reasons, really. I like I say, I hold all that background in the NHS, in other services, and then realised I need to apply some of this to myself when it comes to my relationship with food. And that's where it's grown into now, this practice that I can help others with. So I see it a lot, like say in my group, my Mindful Mouthfuls group, you know, you see little signs of it jotting up and down, and I'm guilty of it myself. We still slip into that language of using things, saying like, oh, I'll have a treat tonight, or oh, I've been bad, or shall we be naughty and have a takeaway? And I see it all the time. Now I'm super tuned into it, see it all the time, catch it in myself at times. And I have to hold myself back from like policing it with others. But no, you know, I'd love to help if I can with just raising awareness of this stuff and helping people take a more compassionate stance towards themselves to help.
Absolutely. And it like kind of brings me around to my next question, really. One of my clients, in fact, asked me, so when she has like a low day, or a day at work that's like been particularly bad, or anything like that's out of the ordinary that gets like thrown at her, her first instinct is to revert back and feed that emotion with food. You know, how would you approach that, for one, and how can she stop herself from doing that?
Okay, and it's such a common experience for so many people. It's probably the number one reason why people might approach me to ask to do some work together. So understanding it is key usually. And obviously, as I was saying before, I always need to work personally with someone to understand their personal situation, but it usually can be thought about from three main angles, and that's to think about what we call a biopsychosocial model, really. So incorporating the biology of what's going on in that moment with the psychology, the thinking traps and things like that, with the social elements, as in the stuff we've maybe been exposed to over our life, and bringing it together. So I would imagine, I can only hypothesize without meeting your lady, that maybe over her life she's maybe been exposed to messages that reinforce the soothing element of food, or food being a treat, food being something that is a reward, something to go to for distraction. Maybe there's been those messages growing up, and then what that does is it kind of lays down in our biology a certain response in the brain. So it might be that when stress is around, well, we know definitely when stress is around, our threat center in our brain is activated. You get that fight or flight response, the cortisol. And then there's two other emotion regulation systems in our brain, one that's about drive and doing, and one that's about soothing. When the threat system is activated, we will naturally turn to one of these, or one of these will kick in to try and dampen down the threat. Sometimes it's a drive. So some people are doers and doers and doers and want to distract and do and problem solve. Sometimes it's a soothing, and if we are able to really enhance our soothing system well, then we might be able to turn to helpful things to soothe when we need it. That's kind of the ideal. But what we know is that food can actually be linked with our soothing system, as I mentioned before. Depending on our experiences growing up, it can be that food becomes a soother, or maybe food has become a distraction. So either way, food can sit in either of these systems and can kick in as a really easy go-to quick way of helping to calm the threat system. So that is kind of laid down in the biology of our brain, and certain chemicals are released. So for some people, the same chemicals are released when we're eating, particularly if we're eating certain foods that take us back to being soothed as a child. Actual, like the love hormone can be released when we're eating it. So, you know, people might say, oh, I always remember having and it might be stuff you don't think of, you know, maybe we always had a chippy tea on a Friday, and it always just felt so nice because it was a real family event. We'd be sat round, we loved it, enjoyed it. So it might be that now having a chippy tea releases the oxytocin. So it's not always your typical kind of cake and ice cream like you might think. It's whatever's been associated. So it might be that something like that's going on. Or there might not be something that obvious, but it might be just generally that the hit of dopamine that we get when we really eat food. So there's certain foods, high sugar foods, high fat foods, that give us a rush of dopamine when we eat them. Some of them even release serotonin, like chocolate contains serotonin releasing chemicals. So it might be that we've just kind of experienced those hits so often that when we're stressed, our brain is saying, come on, we need something to balance us out. And again, that is maybe a learned response that is so easily accessible. So I hope that explains a little as to how we can come to that situation. And most of us do. We all have a relationship with food, so most of us will have little cues in there, and there will be a reaction going on in our brain when we eat. So then in terms of what we can do about that is kind of like start to be aware of it a bit more, on more of a gradual background basis. So it might be that, or quite often people are very aware of it when it's happening, or, you know, immediately after. Maybe even be aware of it in the run up, you know, so if you had a stressful day at work, you might be quite aware mid-afternoon that you're thinking, I'm probably going to end up doing this tonight. But the awareness to really work on is the day-to-day general awareness of how you're feeling, what you're thinking in life overall, like every moment of every day as such. And having increasing that foundation of awareness it helps you step out of an autopilot cycle. It puts you on the front foot there, if that's a thing, to be ready and primed to notice and be able to pause and step outside what has been your usual response. ACT calls that unhooking. So you might notice what's hooking you down a direction, pause and able to unhook, so that you can then make a more considered choice. And it's hard, don't get me wrong, like making changes to these patterns is challenging at first. So another thing you need to do that I often do with people is work on some skills to be able to tolerate the emotions that are going to come up when you do that, because often it might mean being left with like feelings of agitation. You know, if you can't get, or if you're purposely choosing not to take on the thing that has soothed you for so long, you're going to be left with agitation, you know, frustration, maybe feeling really, really low. So you need to work with yourself to be able to be okay with feeling like that.
And I suppose it goes back to those kind of techniques we were talking about for dealing with stress. It's the same sort of thing, isn't it? And finding techniques that when you're in that moment that you can turn to. Like for me, it's like I use breathing techniques a lot. So just start taking some deep breaths or doing a meditation. That works for me. You know, it's finding what that individual will respond well to in that situation.
And for some people, things like meditations and such can feel really strange, or feel not like they're not working in those moments. So if you're overwhelmed with a lot of emotion, and it might be that you're feeling really, really, really low, then sitting with that can feel like, well, this isn't helpful because I'm not leaving it feeling any better. Doing a 20-minute body scan, I'm still feeling just as rubbish afterwards. It's not worked. So one of the common experiences in therapy for me is to sit with people and help them learn and experience really what it's like to sit with a feeling like that, and know that it's okay that we might leave that meditation and not feel any different. That's okay. It's not that it's not worked, it's that you've had an experience of sitting with that feeling, and actually this is where like the acceptance part of acceptance commitment therapy comes in. There's a lot to be said for having to work as human beings to accept that sometimes we feel a certain way and it's not pleasant, and we really don't want it. We don't want to feel like that. But it might be that actually striving to not feel like that could be part of an unhelpful cycle. So we kind of have to learn to sit with a feeling and feel more, develop confidence over time that we can sit with a feeling and it will be okay. And we will be okay ultimately. And it doesn't have to mean, because a lot of people are worried, understandably worried about feeling really low in case it spirals. So there's a lot of work that I often do, which is about helping people learn that it's okay to be low, and it won't have, doesn't have to spiral, and life will still go on, and learn the way that these feelings ebb and flow, because our emotions just constantly changing. So it's hard to give a succinct answer, because obviously I'm just kind of thinking about all the different people here that I work with, all the different scenarios that come up. So there's a lot involved in trying to help someone break that kind of pattern. But I guess if someone was wanting to try and do something helpful for themselves, I'd say it's start to kind of notice and name when the urge is coming on, consciously try and pause, and almost like visually unhook from it. Okay, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling an urge for this, I know this is what I'm wanting, but I'm going to try and surf that urge and do something different. That would be kind of your starting point. And if for some reason that's getting really tricky and you're not able to, that's when it's maybe time to get a little bit of help with it. But for some people, that's okay. Like you say, it might just be working on the awareness means that they can notice, unhook and distract themselves. And that works for the short term, long enough, doing that repeatedly enough to break the habit and cycle.
So fascinating. I know that for me, I'm the opposite. When I get stressed, I stop eating.
Yeah, same actually.
But I think that's a learned behavior from being young and having an eating disorder, that like, okay, I'm in fight or flight, just stop eating. And
right. That's
shut down, completely shut down. But it's a minefield, isn't it? We could like talk about this kind of thing all day, because there's so much involved, isn't it? And I like even thinking in my own head, because I analyze things quite a lot, that why do I stop eating when I'm stressed? Oh, it's probably down to that. It might be other things as well.
Well, your appetite is switched off. When you've got cortisol in your system, the last thing your body needs is food to be digested.
It is a minefield, like we say. You know, there's so many layers. Like when I talk about endometriosis, there's so many layers, and that's why I like to work with people on an individual basis, because then I can get down to the nitty gritty of what is causing you the issues. You know, we can talk quite kind of globally about these things, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the individual and what will work for them. Absolutely. For sure. Well, thank you so much again. You know, it comes around quick, these monthly Q&As, but I always find it really interesting, and
me too.
Thank you for joining me again.
No, thanks for answering those questions for my ladies in my group. Absolute I shall post pleasure. It in so they can see.
Okay, well, thank you so much for watching. And if you're obviously going to be watching this on playback, give us some feedback. Let us know any questions that you might have for us next month, and we look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Take care. Bye.
Bye.